Okay, excellent. Back to the action, video two. So right, we have everything sort of set up, the template. We're going to start writing our new food class. So what's the idea of the class here? This class is going to allow us to create objects of type food that can store nutritional information into the object. The idea is that we only have to write one class, but that we can make four different objects from that one class that are all sort of doing the same thing. And what these four objects are going to do, well, these aren't the objects. We're going to make new objects, but there is going to be an object for hamburger, salads, french fries, and sodas. What the objects are going to do is they're going to store nutritional information that we can then output onto the screen or do whatever we want to with later. So this class food is going to be designed really to create objects, and to create an object, the food class has to have a method in it called a constructor. And a constructor method has a name that is exactly the same as the name of the class, same capitalization and everything. It becomes a constructor. Obviously, a class can have any number of methods in the class, okay, but it can only have one method that shares the same name as the class name itself, and that is the constructor for the class. Now, of course, you can have different types of constructors, but that's another story. So we'll go ahead and write the constructor for the food class, and you write a constructor, you'll make it public, and you're not going to write a class or anything because it's not a class. It's really a method. It's just kind of like this right up here. Okay, so we're making it public. We do not need to make it static, and we don't need to make it void. Well, I guess you could make it void if you want, I suppose. But we'll just write food, and then end brackets right there, and then or parentheses right here after the food. Actually, no space right there, and then another set of brackets. So this shouldn't bring up any errors. I mean, we haven't written anything into the constructor. We haven't put any parameters into the constructor at all. Um, but it's there, and the computer is recognizing this as a constructor because it has the exact same name as the class name. And my computer, it'll turn it red to mean that it's the name of a routine or a method, or not a method, but like a routine. I don't know. Anyhow, okay, so constructors, Tom Cron has talked about parameters that constructors can take. And it's pretty much information that will get fed into the constructor when the object is being built. And then that data, that information, can then be used and modified in any way that the writer of the program wants it to. So we do need to feed some parameters into the food constructor. And namely, we need to feed four parameters into it. And those are that's the price of each item, the fat content of each item, the carbs of each item, and the fiber of each item. And so what we're going to do is we're going to write parameters inside these parentheses here. And you write parameters as if you're declaring a variable, okay? So these parameters are going to have a variable type and then a variable name. And since price has a decimal point, we know price needs to be a double, and that'll be our first parameter. So we'll write double, and then we'll call the variable just something simple like price. And we can separate parameters with commas. And then the second is our fat. Now, if you look at the data table, all the fat, carbs, and fiber content, okay, doesn't have any decimals in there. So you can very likely make those integer values. However, when you read in the textbook the sample output code of what it should look like, the author of the textbook uses double values, obviously, because he has 0.0 and 11.0 and stuff like that. So we'll make all of these double, just to for consistency to the textbook. So this will be double, and we'll just call this fat, and then we'll make double, and we'll call this carbs, and then we'll do a double and call that fiber. And that should all error out. Okay, and so we got this going. We have our constructor, bada bing. We got our four variables. Now, anytime an object needs to be made, all four of these variables need to be fed into the constructor, or else the object will not be made. So let's go ahead and, I'm sort of hopping around, but I'm going to move back up into here, and attempt to make a new object and put the parameters just so you can see how these things work out. So I'm gonna make my new objects right up here. You can do them anywhere. Since I made an object right here with the scanner, I'm just going to make my 4 other objects right below that. That way all my objects are together, all my variables are together, instead of sort of scattering around. That's the way I do it. So we're going to make a new variable, and we'll call it hamburger, okay, which is going to be different from hamburgers, which was our integer value for the amount of hamburgers someone ordered. We're just going to make a new variable called hamburger, and we're going to use it of type food. And so we do that by writing food hamburger, okay? And if I put a semicolon there, all the errors should go out. Food should turn blue because it's recognizing food as a data type because you've written the food class. So it's, you know, if I wrote rich here, obviously an error is going to come up because it doesn't know what the rich class is. But since I've already written this food class, we're good to go. So we're declaring a variable of type food, but let's go ahead and initialize it. Let's make an object just like we did up here. So instead of a semicolon, I'll do equals, and to make a new object, the code word is new, and the new object is going to be of type food, just like this was of type scanner, right? So this is of type food, and then the parentheses here. Now this is calling up an error right here because it's trying to make an object, but it's trying to make an object. It's looking for a constructor in the food class that takes no parameters, and it's not finding one. It's only finding a constructor that takes 4 parameters. So this is going to call up an error until we put the 4 double-valued data points, you know, into our parameters here. Let's see what this error actually says. Yeah, it says the constructor lunch order.food parentheses is undefined, which means the food constructor with no parameters is undefined. We haven't written it. But the one with 4 double values is defined. And for the food, what we would write is the price first, 1.85, comma, and then we'd write the fat content, which is 9.0 grams, and then we'll write the carbohydrates, that's a lot of carbs, 33.1, sorry, 33.0, and then fiber is 1.0. And we are calling up an error, and I wonder why. No enclosing instance type, multiple markers at this line. I'm going to pause really quick and come back. Okay, the reason why I'm getting an error here is because the food class, I forgot to make my food class static because I was just sort of copying this one. The food class sets inside of the lunch order class. Instead of making that new .java file like we did, we put the food class inside of the lunch order class. This class has to become static. So we'll write static in here, and bada bing, that variable should go. That error should go away. So we've successfully made a new hamburger object, okay, and we've put in the parameters to make that object. Now what we do with these parameters, you know, I'll get to later, but the idea here is that you create an object using parameters, and you create that object using a constructor that you write inside of the food class that you've written, and you have to say what all the parameters are. So while we're here, I'm just going to go ahead and make the object for all the other classes, and I'll pause while I do this and then come back to it. Okay, I'm back, and I went ahead and typed in all this good stuff here. Sorry, it should be like that. Typed in all this good stuff. I made 4 new classes, I made 3 new classes, just like the hamburger class. One for salad, one for fries, one for soda, and put in all that nutritional information of the price, the fat content, the carbohydrates, and the fiber for each one of these objects based on the data table in the book. Notice how when I came back I had to take out that S here because this was throwing up an error because I already have a variable called sodas, and that's the int value that we're going to get from the user. So you can't have 2 variable names even though they're of different types. So we'll just call that soda, and we'll leave that one sodas, which kind of makes sense because we're saying that an individual soda costs 95 cents, has 0 grams of fat, 38 carbs, yada, yada, yada. And this I just called fries instead of french fries. So any hoozle, I guess I'm going to go ahead and stop this video. I'll start up on the 4th video. But the idea here that I worked with this is that we made a constructor, bada bing, so that we can make new objects of type food. And in order to do that, the parameters that you set in your constructor have to match the parameters that you're giving it when you're making the object. And if these do not match, you're going to get an error. So when you're writing a class and you're writing a constructor, you have to sort of think, okay, what does this class, what do I want this thing to do, and what values do I need in order to do that? What sort of parameters does this constructor need to take? So that's sort of the critical thinking part of programming, is to figuring out that this food class needs to take 4 double valued parameters. Okay, and I'll see you back in video 3.